Most people believe that magic disappeared long ago. Not because it was lost, but because people stopped looking for it. There are places in the world that quietly wait. Places that never appear on maps. Places that reveal themselves only when someone needs them the most. Tonight's story begins on an ordinary autumn evening in a quiet English village called Ashbrook. A place where narrow cobblestone streets curved gently between rows of old stone cottages. Where climbing ivy covered brick walls that had stood for centuries. Where the church clock rang softly every hour, even when no one seemed to hear it. By day, Ashbrook was peaceful. By night, it became almost dreamlike. The streets emptied. Warm lights glowed behind lace curtains. The scent of wood smoke drifted lazily through the cool evening air. Some people believed nothing unusual had ever happened there. Others smiled quietly whenever they heard that. Because every village has its secrets. Ashbrook simply kept its own a little better than most. Emma had lived there for nearly 12 years. She was 30 years old and worked as the village librarian. She loved books in the quiet way gardeners love flowers. Not because they were valuable, but because each one carried a small piece of another person's heart. Most evenings followed the same gentle rhythm. She would lock the library doors. Straighten the final stack of returned books. Wish the last visitor a pleasant evening. Then begin the familiar walk home beneath the old street lamps. She enjoyed those quiet walks. They gave her space to think. Or perhaps more accurately, space not to think. Life had become comfortable. Comfortable enough that the days blended together. Wake. Work. Read. Sleep. Repeat. There was nothing wrong with her life. Yet sometimes, late at night, she found herself wondering if she had quietly stopped writing her own story. Years earlier, Emma had dreamed of becoming an author. She filled notebooks with ideas. Invented characters who traveled impossible worlds. Imagined adventures waiting beyond every horizon. But little by little, real life became louder than imagination. The notebooks stayed closed. The dreams became smaller. Eventually, she convinced herself she was happy simply helping other people discover wonderful stories. Even if she no longer believed she could write one herself. It was a gentle sadness. The kind almost invisible. The kind carried so long that it simply became part of who you were. One chilly October evening, rain began to fall just as Emma left the library. Not a heavy rain. Only a soft drizzle that turned the street lamps into shimmering golden halos. She opened her umbrella and decided to take a different route home. It was only a few streets longer. A quiet lane called Willow Street. Emma rarely walked there. There wasn't much reason to. Only old cottages. A bakery that had closed years ago. An empty brick building. And silence. As she turned the corner, something made her slow her steps. At first she couldn't understand why. Everything seemed familiar. The rain. The lamps. The autumn leaves dancing across the pavement. Then she noticed it. Between the old bakery and the abandoned brick building. A tiny bookshop stood where no shop had ever been before. Emma stopped walking. She frowned slightly. She knew Willow Street. She had walked through Ashbrook for over a decade. There had never been a bookshop here. Not once. Yet there it stood as though it had belonged there forever. Golden light spilled through tall windows lined with shelves overflowing with books. A small wooden sign gently swayed above the entrance. Midnight Books. The letters had been carefully painted in gold. Inside, someone moved quietly between the shelves. Emma looked behind her. The street was empty. She looked back at the little shop. Warm light flickered across the rain-soaked cobblestones. For reasons she couldn't explain, the sight filled her with an overwhelming feeling of peace. Not excitement. Not fear. Recognition. As though she had been expected. She stepped closer. The windows revealed hundreds, perhaps thousands, of books. Some looked centuries old. Others seemed almost new. There were no price tags. No advertisements. No display stands. Only books. Waiting patiently, Emma hesitated beside the wooden door. A tiny brass bell hung above it. She smiled to herself. This must be new, she whispered. And somehow I completely missed the opening. She reached for the handle. The old brass knob felt warm beneath her fingers. Almost impossibly warm against the cool autumn air. The bell chimed softly as the door opened. Not loud. Not sharp. Just a single gentle note that echoed through the peaceful silence. The scent reached her first. Old paper. Cedar wood. Fresh tea. A hint of lavender. It smelled less like a shop, and more like every comforting memory she had ever known. Emma stepped inside. The door closed quietly behind her. For a brief moment. The sound of the rain outside disappeared completely. Only silence remained. Warm. Gentle. Almost as though the world itself had paused. Waiting for the next page to be turned, Emma remained standing just inside the doorway. She wasn't sure why. Nothing about the little bookshop felt unusual anymore. If anything, it felt strangely familiar. The warm light wrapped gently around the room. Tiny lanterns hung from wooden beams above, casting a soft amber glow across shelves that seemed to stretch much farther than the size of the building should have allowed. Every shelf was filled. Some books were wrapped in faded leather. Others had beautiful cloth covers embroidered with silver thread. Several had no titles at all, only blank spines waiting quietly among the others. Emma slowly removed her raincoat. She hadn't intended to stay. She had only wanted a quick look before continuing home. Yet now, the thought of leaving seemed oddly disappointing. The little brass bell above the door gave one final soft chime. Then everything became still again. The silence inside the shop wasn't empty. It felt alive, like the peaceful silence inside a forest after fresh snow had fallen. Emma smiled to herself. I've never seen a place like this. A gentle voice answered from somewhere between the shelves. Very few people have. She turned. An elderly man stepped into view. His movements were slow and graceful. Not because he was weak, but because he never seemed to hurry. His silver hair was neatly combed. Round spectacles rested comfortably upon his nose. His blue eyes carried the quiet kindness of someone who had spent many years listening instead of speaking. He wore a neatly pressed brown waistcoat over a crisp white shirt. A small gold pocket watch rested against his chest. Everything about him seemed timeless. He smiled warmly. Good evening. Emma returned the smile. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not disturbing you. The old man chuckled softly. My dear. No one has ever disturbed this bookshop. He extended a hand. My name is Alden. Emma shook it gently. I'm Emma. I know. She blinked. You do? Mr. Alden nodded as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. I've been expecting you. Emma laughed politely. I think you must have mistaken me for someone else. I rarely mistake people. He spoke kindly. Without pride. Without mystery. Simply as though he were stating the weather. You arrived precisely when you were meant to. Emma looked around again. I've lived here for years. I've never seen this shop. Mr. Alden smiled. That is because it wasn't here. She frowned. What do you mean? The shop appears only when it is needed. Emma laughed again. I must admit. That's quite an unusual way to advertise. The old bookseller's eyes twinkled with amusement. We've never needed advertising. He gestured toward the shelves. The people who belong here always find their way. Emma wasn't certain why, but she believed him. Not completely. Not logically. Yet something inside her quietly accepted his words before her mind had time to question them. She wandered slowly between the shelves. Each section carried a small wooden plaque. Some read, Journeys. Others, Hope, Friendship, Forgiveness, New Beginnings. There was even a shelf simply called, Home. Emma stopped. She had never seen books arranged like this. Not by author. Not by subject. But by feelings. Mr. Alden noticed her curiosity. Books have always understood people better than people understand themselves. Emma traced a finger gently across the spine of an old green volume. I organize books alphabetically. Mr. Alden smiled. That is excellent for finding a book. He paused. But not always for finding yourself. The words lingered gently in Emma's thoughts. Finding yourself. She wasn't sure when she had stopped looking. Perhaps. She never realized she had become lost. Mr. Alden continued walking. Emma followed without thinking. They passed reading tables decorated with fresh flowers. Comfortable leather chairs sat beside fireplaces where small flames danced quietly behind polished glass. Old clocks rested upon shelves. Curiously, none of them ticked. Their hands pointed to different hours. Yet somehow, the silence felt perfectly natural. Emma noticed one clock showing exactly 12 o'clock. Its pendulum hung perfectly still. "Do the clocks work?" she asked. Mr. Alden smiled. "They work exactly as they should. They simply measure different things." She tilted her head. "Different things? Some count minutes." He gently touched the old clock. "Others count memories." He pointed toward another. "Some measure courage." Emma smiled. "And that one?" Mr. Alden looked thoughtfully toward the largest clock in the room. "That one measures second chances." Emma laughed softly. "I wish life worked that way." "It does." He looked at her kindly. "We're simply taught to read the wrong clocks." A quiet warmth spread through Emma's heart. She couldn't explain it. Every sentence the old bookseller spoke felt less like advice, and more like something she had always known, but forgotten. He led her toward the back of the shop. The shelves became taller. The lanterns grew softer. The air smelled increasingly of cedar wood and chamomile tea. Finally they reached a small circular room unlike any library Emma had ever seen. Above them, there was no ceiling. Or rather, there was. But it looked exactly like the night sky. Stars shimmered overhead. Clouds drifted slowly across deep midnight blue. The moon glowed gently between them. Emma stood speechless. "It looks real." Mr. Alden smiled. "It is." She laughed. "How?" "The same way dreams become real. They simply begin somewhere people cannot explain." In the center of the room stood a small oak table. Upon it rested a delicate silver teapot. Steam curled lazily from its spout. Beside it sat 2 porcelain cups. Mr. Alden poured tea. The aroma of honey and chamomile filled the room. He offered Emma a cup. She accepted gratefully. The first sip was wonderfully warm. The second felt almost magical. Not because it tasted unusual, but because something inside her became quiet. The anxious thoughts that had followed her for weeks. The endless little worries. The feeling that something was missing. All drifted gently into the background. She closed her eyes for a moment. "I haven't felt this peaceful in a very long time." Mr. Alden nodded. "Peace rarely disappears. It simply becomes difficult to hear beneath all the noise." Emma looked down into her teacup. Tiny ripples shimmered across the surface. Almost like moonlight dancing on water. "Is this why people come here?" she asked. "To find peace." Mr. Alden smiled. "Some do. Others come searching for answers. And some," he looked at Emma with gentle understanding, "come searching for themselves." Emma felt her breath catch. She hadn't told him anything about her life. Nothing about the notebooks hidden in a drawer at home. Nothing about the stories she had stopped writing years ago. Nothing about the quiet emptiness she sometimes carried without understanding why. Yet somehow, he seemed to know. Not in a frightening way. In the comforting way an old friend notices sadness before it is spoken. Mr. Alden stood and walked toward a tall bookshelf hidden behind a velvet curtain. From one shelf, he carefully lifted a single book. It was unlike every other book Emma had seen that evening. Its cover was deep midnight blue. Smooth leather. Silver edges. At its center, a small crescent moon shimmered faintly in the warm lantern light. He carried it carefully back to the table, then placed it gently before Emma. She looked at the beautiful book. There was no title. No author's name. Only the tiny silver moon. Mr. Alden rested his hand softly upon its cover, then looked into Emma's eyes. His voice became almost a whisper. "This book has been waiting for you. For a very long time." Emma hesitated. She slowly reached toward it. Just as her fingertips touched the cover, the silver crescent moon began to glow. Very softly, almost like moonlight reflected on calm water. Emma looked up in surprise. Mr. Alden smiled, then quietly said the words that would change everything she believed about the little bookshop. "Be careful, Emma. This book doesn't tell stories. It remembers them." Emma looked down at the beautiful blue book. Its leather cover felt warm beneath her fingertips. Not hot. Not cold. Simply alive. The tiny silver crescent moon shimmered gently, as though breathing with the quiet rhythm of the room. She looked at Mr. Alden. "You said it remembers stories." He nodded. "It remembers the ones people forget." Emma smiled uncertainly. "I don't think I've forgotten any stories." The old bookseller's eyes softened. "We seldom notice what we've forgotten." He folded his hands comfortably in front of him. "Memories are curious things. We carefully protect the painful ones. But the beautiful ones, they often fade first." Emma frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because we quietly begin believing they weren't important." He smiled. "When in truth, they shaped us more than we ever realized." Emma rested both hands on the cover. For a long moment, she simply listened. The room had become impossibly still. The fire crackled softly nearby. Rain tapped gently against distant windows. Somewhere beyond the shelves, the little brass bell gave a faint, almost musical sound. Everything seemed to be waiting. Mr. Alden nodded once. "You may open it." Emma took a slow breath, then carefully lifted the cover. The first page was blank. Cream-colored paper. Perfectly smooth. She turned another page. Still blank. Another. Nothing. She smiled. "I think your magical book has forgotten its story." Mr. Alden chuckled quietly. "It has not forgotten. It is waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you." Emma looked down again. As she rested her hand gently upon the page, letters slowly appeared. Not all at once. Not like ink being written. More like morning mist slowly revealing words that had always been there. She read the first sentence. Emma was 7 years old when she discovered that stories could make lonely afternoons feel shorter. Her breath caught. She remembered the little window seat in her childhood home. Rain sliding down the glass. Her grandmother sitting beside her with a faded green book. The smell of cinnamon tea. The warmth of a knitted blanket. She had not thought about that afternoon in years. Yet suddenly, every tiny detail returned. Her grandmother's gentle laugh. The sound of logs burning in the fireplace. Even the small crack in the teacup they had shared. It was all there. Perfectly clear. Emma smiled without realizing it. She turned another page. At 11 years old, Emma decided she would become a writer. She laughed softly. "I remember that." The page continued. She filled 23 notebooks with stories about hidden gardens, lonely travelers, talking birds, forgotten castles, and children who collected stars. Emma's eyes widened. 23. She whispered. "I'd forgotten how many there were." Mr. Alden smiled. "The book never forgets." She turned another page. This time, the smile slowly faded. At 17, someone told Emma that stories were lovely hobbies, but not practical futures. The memory returned instantly. A teacher. Kind. Well-meaning. Trying to prepare her for adulthood. Writing is difficult to build a life around. Perhaps choose something more realistic. The words had never been cruel, but they had settled quietly inside her heart. Year after year. Until one day, she believed them. Emma stared silently at the page. "I never blamed him." Mr. Alden nodded. "I know. He wasn't trying to hurt me. No. He simply passed along a fear that someone once handed to him." Emma looked up. "So many dreams end that way." The old bookseller smiled sadly. "Very few dreams are destroyed. They are usually placed carefully on a shelf. With the promise I'll return tomorrow. He looked toward the endless books surrounding them. But tomorrow quietly becomes years. Emma closed the book for a moment. She wasn't crying. There was no bitterness. Only understanding. She realized she had spent years convincing herself she had made the sensible choice. She loved being a librarian. She truly did. Helping people discover books had brought her great joy. But somewhere inside, a quieter voice had waited patiently. A voice she had ignored for far too long. She opened the book again. New words appeared. At 24, Emma bought a beautiful leather notebook. She smiled. I still have it. She wrote only one sentence. Emma whispered the words before they appeared. I'll begin when I have more time. The sentence slowly formed on the page exactly as she remembered it. She closed her eyes. How many times had she told herself that? Next week. Next month. After work becomes less busy. After life becomes easier. Yet somehow, life always found another reason to postpone the beginning. Mr. Alden poured another cup of tea. Neither of them hurried to speak. Silence settled comfortably between them. Finally, Emma asked, "Do people always wait?" He looked thoughtfully into the fire. Often. What are they waiting for? The perfect moment. And does it ever arrive? Mr. Alden smiled warmly. I've owned this bookshop for a very long time. I've discovered something. The perfect moment is usually just an ordinary moment. That someone finally decides not to postpone. Emma looked toward the shelves again. Thousands of books rested quietly in the warm glow of the lanterns. She suddenly wondered how many untold stories surrounded her. How many forgotten dreams. How many unopened possibilities. The thought wasn't sad. It was hopeful. Because if stories could wait, perhaps they could also begin again. She turned another page. The writing had changed. There were no memories now. Only a single sentence. Turn one more page, if you wish to see what might still be waiting for you. Emma frowned. What does that mean? Mr. Alden looked at the book. The memories are finished. What comes next? He paused. Has not happened. Emma looked at him. You mean? He nodded slowly. The next pages do not remember. They imagine. Emma hesitated. What if I don't like what I see? Mr. Alden smiled kindly. Then remember. He gently rested a hand on the cover. It is only one possible story. Not the only one. Emma took a slow breath. Outside. The rain had stopped. Moonlight filtered softly through the windows. The fire crackled gently beside them. Everything felt peaceful. Safe. She slowly reached toward the next page. Her fingers rested lightly against the paper. Then, very carefully, she began to turn it. Emma rested her fingertips on the edge of the page. For a moment, she hesitated. She had spent the evening reading memories she had forgotten. Moments that had quietly shaped the person she had become. But this felt different. These pages had not yet been lived. She looked at Mr. Alden. Are you certain I should read it? The old bookseller smiled gently. I cannot answer that for you. Why not? Because every meaningful story begins with a choice. Emma lowered her eyes to the book once more. Then, slowly, she turned the page. At first, nothing appeared. The paper remained perfectly blank. She waited. The fire crackled softly. The grandfather clocks stood in complete silence. Outside, a cool breeze whispered against the windows. Then, one line of silver ink slowly formed across the page. One ordinary evening. Emma leaned closer. Emma finally opened the notebook she had carried home for years. She smiled. The sentence continued. She did not write because she believed she would become famous. She wrote because the stories inside her had grown tired of waiting. Emma felt something stir quietly within her. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't surprise. It felt like recognition. As though someone had gently spoken a truth she had always known. She turned another page. More words appeared. Months later, the little stories she wrote began finding readers. Emma frowned slightly. Readers. She had never imagined anyone reading her work. The next lines appeared. Some readers smiled. Some cried. Some fell asleep peacefully with her words still echoing gently in their hearts. Emma couldn't help but laugh. I don't think anyone would ever want to read my little stories. Mr. Alden looked at her kindly. Do you know why people love stories? She thought for a moment. Because they're entertaining? Sometimes. Because they help us escape. Occasionally. He smiled. But the finest stories do something else. What? They remind us that we are not alone. Emma looked thoughtfully at the page. How many evenings had she spent helping visitors choose books from the library? How many conversations had begun with, I'm looking for something comforting. Or, I just need a story tonight. She suddenly understood. People weren't always searching for adventure. Sometimes. They were simply searching for comfort. A quiet companion for a difficult day. A gentle reminder that hope still existed. She turned another page. The writing continued. Emma discovered that writing was not about creating perfect stories. It was about leaving little lights along the road for strangers to find. She whispered the sentence aloud. Little lights. The words settled gently into her heart. She remembered the lighthouse stories she had loved as a child. A lighthouse never crossed the ocean. It simply stood faithfully on the shore. Its purpose was never to travel. Only to shine. Perhaps stories were much the same. They didn't solve every problem. They simply helped people find their way through the darkness. Mr. Alden quietly poured more tea. Emma noticed that the teapot never seemed to empty. The steam rose in soft curls. The scent of chamomile filled the room once again. She took another sip. The warmth spread gently through her chest. This place feels different. Mr. Alden smiled. It is. I don't mean magical. She looked around. I mean. She searched for the right words. It feels unhurried. The old bookseller nodded. The world teaches people to hurry. Finish quickly. Move faster. Always think about tomorrow. He looked toward the glowing fire. But stories have always belonged to those willing to slow down. Emma watched the flames dance quietly. She couldn't remember the last time she had allowed herself to do absolutely nothing. No plans. No rushing. No checking the clock. Only stillness. It felt like rediscovering an old friend. After several peaceful moments, Emma asked another question. Have many people visited this shop? Mr. Alden smiled. More than you could imagine. What happened to them? They returned home. And they carried something with them. What? He looked thoughtfully at the shelves. Not books. Not magic. Courage. Emma tilted her head. Courage. He nodded. The courage to begin again. Emma looked back at the open book. The next page had already begun filling with words. Not every chapter begins with a great adventure. Sometimes. It begins with a single quiet decision. A letter finally written. A phone call finally made. A dream finally remembered. Or one blank page that is no longer left empty. Emma smiled. Perhaps life wasn't changed by enormous moments after all. Perhaps. It changed one peaceful choice at a time. The room became wonderfully quiet again. The fire burned lower. The stars above the magical ceiling seemed brighter now. Emma realized she had completely forgotten about the rain. Forgotten about the walk home. Forgotten about tomorrow. She had become completely present. Mr. Alden noticed the peaceful expression on her face. You've stopped asking questions. Emma smiled. I think. I've stopped needing answers. The old bookseller laughed softly. That happens sometimes. When people finally begin listening to themselves. Just then. A soft bell echoed somewhere near the front of the shop. It rang only once. Gentle. Clear. Almost like the beginning of a new day. Emma looked toward the doorway. What's that? Mr. Alden stood slowly. Morning. She blinked. Already? He nodded. The night passes differently here. Emma glanced toward one of the grandfather clocks. Its hands now rested just before dawn. She could hardly believe it. It had felt as though only an hour had passed. She carefully closed the blue book. As soon as the cover touched the final page, the silver crescent moon faded back to its gentle glow. The room became still once more. Emma rested both hands upon the book. "I don't want to forget tonight." Mr. Alden smiled warmly. "You won't. But memories fade. The important ones don't." She looked into his kind eyes. "Will I ever find this place again?" The old bookseller was quiet for a long moment. "Finally," he answered. "You may spend years searching and never see it. Or you may stop searching completely and find it standing quietly at the end of another street." Emma laughed softly. "That's not much of an answer." Mr. Alden's smile widened. "The finest answers rarely are." He carefully lifted the blue book from the table and returned it to its place upon the shelf. Then he reached beneath the counter. When he returned, he was holding something wrapped in soft brown paper. He placed it gently into Emma's hands. She looked at him with quiet curiosity. "What is it?" Mr. Alden smiled. "A beginning." Emma slowly untied the string. Inside was a beautifully bound navy blue notebook. Its cover was simple, elegant, and in the center, pressed into the leather, was a tiny silver crescent moon. She looked up in surprise. "It's empty." Mr. Alden nodded. "The finest stories always are, before someone is brave enough to write the first sentence." Emma held the notebook close to her heart. For the first time in many years, the future no longer felt uncertain. It felt wonderfully open. Emma stood quietly beside the counter. The little navy blue notebook rested gently in her hands. Its leather cover was smooth beneath her fingertips. The tiny silver crescent moon reflected the warm lantern light. She smiled. It was beautiful. Not because it was expensive. Not because it was magical. But because it was empty. For the first time in many years, an empty page no longer felt intimidating. It felt full of possibility. Mr. Alden watched her with the quiet smile she had come to know so well. "You look different," he said. Emma laughed softly. "I feel different." The old bookseller nodded. "That is often what happens. People think they leave this place carrying something new." He paused. "When in truth, they simply remember something they already had." Emma looked thoughtfully at the notebook. "Courage." Mr. Alden smiled. "Exactly." The little brass bell above the entrance chimed once. Outside, the darkness had begun to soften. The sky was no longer black. A pale ribbon of blue stretched slowly across the horizon. Morning was coming. Emma felt an unexpected sadness. She wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. She looked around the little bookshop one final time. The endless wooden shelves. The warm lanterns. The comfortable chairs beside the glowing fireplace. The scent of cedar wood. The quiet. Every corner felt peaceful. As though the building itself had been built from kindness. "I wish I could stay." Mr. Alden looked toward the window. "So does almost everyone." Emma smiled. "Then why can't we?" He looked back at her. "Because comfort is not meant to become a hiding place." She was silent. "The purpose of this shop," he continued gently, "is not to keep people here. It is to help them leave." Emma understood. The bookshop had never been an escape from life. It had been a doorway back into it. A place that reminded people how to keep living. How to keep hoping. How to keep creating. She slipped the notebook carefully into her coat pocket. "I think I'm ready." Mr. Alden nodded. "I know." He walked with her toward the front door. The old wooden floor creaked softly beneath their footsteps. The brass bell waited silently above the entrance. Emma rested one hand on the handle. Before opening the door, she turned back. "Will I ever see you again?" The old bookseller smiled. "I believe every story meets its readers more than once." Emma laughed quietly. "That's still not a proper answer." Mr. Alden's eyes twinkled. "I've always preferred stories to answers." She shook her head, smiling. "I suppose you have." She opened the door. Cool morning air drifted inside. Birdsong echoed faintly through the peaceful village. Emma stepped onto the cobblestone street. The rain had washed everything clean. Autumn leaves shimmered beneath the early sunlight. She took a few slow steps away. Then, almost without thinking, she turned around. The little bookshop was gone. There was no glowing window. No wooden sign. No lanterns. Only the old brick wall that had stood there for decades. Emma stood perfectly still. She looked left. Then right. Nothing. Only the empty street. For a brief moment. She wondered if she had dreamed everything. Then she slipped her hand into her coat pocket. The notebook was still there. She smiled. No. Some dreams leave footprints. The days that followed felt wonderfully ordinary. Emma returned to the library. She greeted familiar faces. Shelved returned books. Recommended stories to children. Helped elderly visitors find forgotten classics. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet everything felt different. She noticed little things she had overlooked before. The way morning sunlight rested across the wooden tables. The laughter of children choosing books. The quiet excitement on someone's face after discovering a story they had been searching for. Life had not become extraordinary. She had simply begun paying attention. Every evening, after walking home beneath the old street lamps, Emma placed the little notebook on her kitchen table. She brewed a cup of tea, opened the first page, and wrote. At first, only a few sentences. Sometimes only one. Some evenings she described the clouds. Other evenings she wrote about lonely travelers, hidden gardens, old musicians, forgotten promises, children who collected stars. The stories were small, quiet, gentle. Yet each page made her feel more alive than the one before. She no longer worried whether anyone would ever read them. Writing itself had become enough. Winter arrived. Snow covered the rooftops of Ashbrook. The library became even cozier. One snowy afternoon, a little girl wandered inside. She couldn't have been older than 8. She stood quietly beside Emma's desk. "Excuse me," she whispered. Emma smiled warmly. "Hello. I'm looking for a story." "What kind of story?" The little girl thought carefully. Then answered. "One that makes everything feel peaceful." Emma's heart smiled before her face did. She looked around the library. Hundreds of books surrounded them. Every one wonderful in its own way. Then she remembered the notebook waiting safely at home. Perhaps, one day, her own stories might become that kind of comfort for someone else. Not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. That evening, Emma wrote longer than ever before. The pages filled steadily. She no longer crossed out every sentence. She no longer searched for perfection. She simply wrote. Outside, the moon rose quietly above the rooftops. Its silver light rested gently upon her window. For just a moment, she thought she saw the reflection of a tiny bookshop glowing somewhere beyond Willow Street. She smiled. Then returned to her writing. Whether it had truly been there, or only a memory, no longer mattered. Months passed. Then years. Emma became known throughout Ashbrook as the librarian who always seemed to recommend exactly the right book. Visitors often asked how she managed it. She would simply smile. "I listen. Not only to what people asked for, but to what their hearts quietly hoped to find." Sometimes, that was enough. Late one autumn evening, many years later, Emma found herself walking along Willow Street once again. The village was peaceful. The street lamps glowed softly. Autumn leaves drifted across the cobblestones. She reached the old brick wall, stopped, looked around. There was no bookshop, only silence. Yet she wasn't disappointed. Instead, she placed one gentle hand against the cool bricks and whispered, "Thank you." A soft breeze stirred the autumn leaves. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard the faint sound of a tiny brass bell. She smiled. Then quietly walked home. Perhaps There are places in this world that cannot be found by searching. Perhaps they appear only when someone is finally ready to change. Or perhaps the little bookshop was never the true miracle. Perhaps the miracle was what happened after Emma walked back through its door. She remembered her dream. She found the courage to begin. And one quiet page at a time, she became the author of her own story. And now, as this evening draws gently to a close, perhaps you, too, can leave behind whatever thoughts have been weighing on your heart today. You do not have to solve every problem tonight. You do not have to know every answer. Like Emma, you only need to remember that tomorrow is another blank page. Another quiet beginning. Another chance to write a kinder chapter. So let your breathing become slow. Let your shoulders relax. Allow your thoughts to drift away like autumn leaves carried on a gentle evening breeze. The stars are watching over the quiet world. The moon continues its patient journey across the sky. And somewhere, perhaps at the end of a peaceful street, a warm little bookshop is still glowing softly, waiting for the next traveler who needs to remember that every ending can become a beginning. Thank you for spending this quiet evening with Moonlight Tales. If this story brought you peace tonight, I'd be honored to have you join me again tomorrow for another gentle journey beneath the stars. Until then, sleep peacefully, dream kindly, and remember, the most beautiful stories are often the ones that begin with a single, quiet step. Good night.